I never should have answered that call, but in this line of work, 3 in the morning is just another hour on the clock. My name is Luis Navarro, and I've been a body transport driver for Coastal Medical Transport Services in Oceanside, California for the past 11 years. Most people don't think about what happens between the moment someone dies and when they arrive at the funeral home. That's where I come in. I drive the van, handle the paperwork, treat every person with dignity, and make sure families never have to see this part of the process. It's quiet work, necessary work, and until that night, I thought I'd seen everything this job could show me. The call came through my company phone at exactly 3:07 in the morning on a Tuesday in late October. The dispatcher's voice was clear and professional as always. Female patient, 72 years old, natural causes. Redwood Valley Care Facility on Elm Street. Standard pickup, standard transport to Mercy Funeral Home across town. I'd done this exact route maybe 40 times before. I pulled on my uniform, grabbed my keys, and headed out into the cold. The drive to Redwood Valley took 20 minutes. The streets were empty, just streetlights and the occasional passing car. I remember thinking how quiet it felt, even for that hour. When I pulled up to the facility, something seemed off immediately. The building looked darker than usual. Most nursing homes keep lights on all night, but only 2 windows were lit on the entire 3rd floor. I checked the address on my phone. Correct. I grabbed my clipboard and walked to the front entrance. The doors were locked. That wasn't unusual, security protocol, but when I pressed the buzzer, no one answered. I waited, pressed it again, still nothing. I called the main number listed on my dispatch sheet. It rang 4 times, then someone picked up. Redwood Valley. This is Nurse Patel speaking. I explained I was there for the pickup. She paused. I'm sorry. What pickup? I repeated the name from my dispatch sheet. Another pause, longer this time. Sir, we didn't call for any transport tonight, and we don't have anyone by that name in our facility. I felt my stomach tighten. I asked her to double check. I could hear her typing, clicking through records. When she came back on the line, her voice had changed. It sounded careful, measured. We've never had a patient by that name, and our last death was 6 days ago. We already arranged transport through a different company. I stood there under the entrance awning, staring at my phone. The dispatch was right there. Name, time of death, facility address, room number, everything. I asked her to send someone to the front door anyway. She agreed, but I could tell she thought I was confused or mistaken. A young nurse in blue scrubs appeared behind the glass doors 2 minutes later. She unlocked them, stepped halfway out, and looked at me like I was lost. I showed her my dispatch screen. She squinted at it, then shook her head. That's not our facility code, and our rooms don't go that high. We only have 2 floors. But I was standing right there. The address matched. The building matched. I asked her what the address was. She told me. It was the same number on my phone. She asked if I was feeling okay, if maybe I'd gotten the wrong facility. I thanked her, apologized, and walked back to my van. I sat in the driver's seat and called my dispatch again. No answer. I tried twice more. Nothing. So I pulled up the facility address on my GPS, thinking maybe I'd made a mistake somehow. When the map loaded, I felt the cold creep up my spine. The pin dropped on an empty lot. I zoomed in, street view. The image was dated 2019. There was a building there, a 3-story nursing home with a faded sign that read Redwood Valley Care Facility. But according to the metadata below the image, the structure had been demolished after a fire. Total loss. No survivors. I looked up from my phone and stared at the building in front of me. Lights on, nurse still visible through the glass doors, solid, real. I got out of the van and walked around the perimeter. Everything was there. Dumpsters, handicap ramp, staff parking. I even touched the brick wall with my hand. It was cold and rough under my palm. I got back in the van and tried dispatch one more time. This time, someone picked up. Coastal Medical, this is dispatch. Different voice, male. I didn't recognize it. Yeah, this is Luis. I need clarification on the pickup at Redwood Valley. We don't have any active calls under your driver ID tonight, Luis. I felt my hands start to shake. I told him I'd received a dispatch less than an hour ago. He asked me to read him the details. I did. He was quiet for a long time. Luis, we didn't send that. And that facility closed in 2019. There's nothing at that address anymore. I looked up at the building again. The lights were still on. The nurse was gone, but I could see movement behind one of the third-floor windows, a shadow passing slowly across the glass. Luis, you still there? I told him I was heading back to the depot. He said that was a good idea, that maybe I should take the rest of the night off. I agreed. I started the engine, pulled out of the lot, and drove 3 blocks before I realized I'd forgotten to log the mileage. When I glanced in my rearview mirror to check the road behind me, the building was gone. Just an empty lot surrounded by a chain-link fence. No lights, no structure, no sign it had ever been there. I still drive for Coastal Medical. I still take the overnight shifts. But I never answer calls from Redwood Valley anymore. The dispatch system has sent me there 4 more times since that night. Each time, I tell them I'm unavailable. They don't ask why. And I never tell them that every time I pass Elm Street now, I see lights on in that empty lot. Just 2 windows, always on the 3rd floor. I thought I understood the weight of responsibility in this work until I realized I wasn't driving alone. My name is Diane Ochoa, and I've worked as a transport technician for Riverbend Mortuary Services in Eugene, Oregon for the past 7 years. My job is simple. Pick up the deceased from hospitals, homes, or medical facilities, secure them properly in the transport van, and deliver them safely to the funeral home. It's detail-oriented work. There are protocols, weight distributions, safety checks. You learn to triple check your straps, maintain the correct temperature, and drive carefully. You learn to treat every person in your care with the same respect you'd want for your own family, and you learn not to look in the rearview mirror too often. That last part isn't in the training manual, but after what happened on Route 18 that November, I understand why it should be. The call came in just after midnight. Male patient, 64 years old, cardiac arrest at home. Family had already said their goodbyes. I'd be picking him up from the county medical examiner's office and transporting him to Riverbend, about 2 hours north. Standard procedure. I'd driven that route at least 30 times before. Long stretches of empty highway, a few small towns, dense forest on both sides. Quiet, uneventful. I arrived at the examiner's office at 12:40. The night attendant helped me load the body onto the gurney. He was a heavy-set man, and it took both of us to transfer him into the body bag and secure him properly. I checked the straps twice: chest, waist, legs, head support, everything locked and fastened. The attendant signed the release form, and I rolled the gurney into the back of my van, locking it into the floor brackets with the mechanical clamps. I did my final walk-around check. Rear doors sealed, interior temperature holding steady at 38 degrees. I climbed into the driver's seat, noted the mileage, and started the engine. The first 30 minutes were routine. I kept the radio off, I always do on transports, and focused on the road. The highway was nearly empty. Just me, the broken white lines, and the occasional truck passing in the opposite direction. I adjusted my rearview mirror out of habit, angling it slightly so I could see the cargo area behind me without turning my head. The body bag was exactly where I'd left it. Secure. Still. Professional. At mile marker 42, I glanced up at the mirror again. The body bag had shifted, not much, maybe 6 inches toward the front of the van, but enough that I noticed immediately. I felt my chest tighten. I told myself it was the road. Maybe I'd braked too hard without realizing it, and the momentum had pulled the gurney forward slightly. But I knew that wasn't possible. The floor clamps don't allow for movement. That's the entire point. I kept driving. 5 miles later, I checked again. It had moved closer. Another few inches. The body bag was now almost a full foot, closer to the partition separating the cargo area from the driver's cabin. I could see the outline of the head through the black vinyl, pressed slightly upward as if the person inside had tilted their chin toward the ceiling. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I told myself it was a trick of the light, shadow and reflection, fatigue playing with my eyes, but my gut knew better. I pulled over at the next rest area, a small gravel turnout with a single picnic table and a broken streetlight. I put the van in park, grabbed my flashlight, and walked to the back. My breath came out in white clouds. I unlocked the rear doors and swung them open. The body bag was exactly where I'd left it, straps tight, gurney clamped, everything in place. I ran my hand along the straps to check for looseness. Nothing. I pressed my palm against the body bag itself, checking for any shift in weight distribution. Solid, still, cold. I stood there for a long moment, staring at it. Then I closed the doors, locked them, and got back in the driver's seat. I adjusted my mirror, checked my mileage, started driving again. For the next 20 miles, I didn't look at the mirror. I kept my eyes on the road, on the yellow line, on the dark trees sliding past on both sides. But eventually, I had to check. It's instinct. You glance up to make sure that everything behind you is clear. The body bag had moved again. This time, it was less than 3 feet from the partition. I could see the full shape of the head now, the shoulders, the way the bag seemed to conform to the body inside. And it was facing me, not lying flat the way I'd positioned it, but turned, angled, as if the person inside had rolled onto their side and oriented themselves toward the front of the van, toward me. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. I wanted to pull over again. I wanted to stop the van and check the straps and confirm that nothing had moved, but I didn't, because part of me, some small, cold part buried deep in my chest, knew that if I opened those doors again, everything would still be exactly where I'd left it. The straps would still be tight, the gurney would still be locked, and that would somehow be worse. So I kept draying. I didn't look at the mirror again for the rest of the trip. I kept my eyes forward, hands at 10 and 2, breathing slowly through my nose. I turned the radio on for the first time in 2 years. Static, then a country station I didn't recognize. I let it play, anything to fill the silence. When I finally pulled into the Riverbend lot at 2:38 in the morning, I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before getting out. My hands were shaking. I walked to the back of the van, unlocked the doors, and looked inside. The body bag was in the original position, centered, flat, straps secure, the head facing upward, not tilted, not turned, exactly the way I'd loaded it 2 hours earlier. The funeral director came out to help me unload. He asked if everything went smoothly. I told him yes. He signed the transfer log, and I drove back to the depot in silence. I still work transports. I still drive Route 18, but I don't adjust my rearview mirror anymore. I angle it toward the side window now, just enough to check my blind spot, and I never, ever look at the cargo area while I'm driving. Because the last time I did, 3 weeks after that November night, I saw the body bag pressed flat against the partition, as if someone inside was leaning forward, watching me drive. I didn't pull over that time either. Every cemetery has a rule we don't talk about, but in my line of work, the rule is simpler. Some bodies carry something with them that doesn't belong in a bag. My name is Marcus Delgado, and I've been a transport driver for Summit County Mortuary Services in Park City, Utah for nearly 9 years. I've handled drownings before, lake accidents, bathtub incidents, one terrible case involving a frozen pond. They're difficult in ways other deaths aren't. Families are devastated. The bodies require extra care during transport because of waterlogging and decomposition factors. But the protocol is clear. The medical examiner drains and cleans the body during autopsy. We bag it, secure it, and transport it. Dry, sealed, professional. That protocol failed me on a Wednesday night in March. The call came through at 11:15. Drowning victim, male, 31 years old. The details were sparse. Something about a kayaking accident on the Jordan River 3 days prior. Body had been recovered that morning. Autopsy completed by 6. I was to pick him up from the county morgue downtown and deliver him to Oak Ridge Funeral Home, about 90 minutes south. Routine transport. I'd made the drive dozens of times. I arrived at the morgue at 11:45. The night attendant, a thin man named Gerald I'd worked with before, met me at the loading bay. He looked tired. We exchanged the usual pleasantries while he pulled the body from cold storage. The bag was standard issue black vinyl, zipped and sealed with the county's official tag. I checked the paperwork. Everything matched. Drowning, right? I asked, more out of habit than necessity. Gerald nodded. River. Took them 2 days to find him. I helped him lift the bag onto my gurney. It was heavy, but not unusually so. We secured the straps, chest, waist, legs, and I wheeled it toward my van. Gerald held the bay door open for me. Drive safe, he said. I told him I always did. The loading process was smooth. I rolled the gurney into the cargo area, locked it into the floor mounts, and did my visual check. The body bag was completely dry. I ran my hand along the vinyl to be sure. Bone dry. No moisture, no condensation, nothing. That's important in these cases. Water means contamination, potential biohazard, a failed seal. But this bag was perfect, sealed tight. I closed the rear doors, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The dashboard clock read midnight exactly. I pulled out of the loading bay and headed south on Route 89. The first 40 minutes were uneventful. Light traffic, clear roads. I kept the van at a steady 60, staying in the right lane. I don't play music during transports, never have, so the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rush of a passing car. At mile marker 32, I glanced down at the floor near my feet. There was water. Not much, just a small puddle forming near the gas pedal. I frowned, thinking maybe I'd tracked in some snow without realizing it. But the puddle was growing, spreading slowly toward the center console. I could see it reflecting the dashboard lights. I told myself it was condensation, maybe a leak in the door seal. I wiped it with my hand. Cold, clean, it kept pooling. At mile marker 40, I pulled onto the shoulder and put the van in park. I grabbed my flashlight, got out, and walked to the back. I opened the rear doors and shined the light inside. The body bag was still dry, straps secure, no visible moisture anywhere, but beneath the gurney on the van floor, there was water, a thin layer of it, maybe half an inch deep, spreading outward from directly beneath the bag. I crouched down and touched it, freezing cold. It didn't smell like anything, no chemical odor, no decay, just water. I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The bag wasn't leaking. There were no cracks in the van floor. The temperature controls were functioning normally. I checked the ceiling for condensation. Nothing. I ran my hand along the walls. Dry. I grabbed a towel from my emergency kit and soaked up what I could. It took 3 passes to get most of it. I inspected the body bag one more time, checking every seam, every inch of the zipper, completely sealed, completely dry. I closed the doors, got back in the driver's seat, and continued driving. I told myself it was a fluke, a one-time thing. Maybe the van had a drainage issue I didn't know about. I'd report it when I got back to the depot. 10 miles later, I felt wetness on my right foot. I looked down. Water was pooling again, faster this time. It was coming from behind my seat, flowing forward in a thin stream, pooling near the pedals and spreading outward. I could hear it now, a soft dripping sound, steady and rhythmic, like a leaky faucet. My hands tightened on the wheel. I didn't pull over this time. I kept driving. The water kept spreading. Within 5 minutes, it had reached the center console. Within 10, it was soaking into the floor mats. I could feel it seeping into my boots. I called the morgue. Gerald answered on the third ring. "Did you drain the body?" I asked. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Of course we did. Standard procedure. Why?" I told him about the water. He was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, that's not possible. The body was completely drained. We vacuum sealed the bag. There's no water in there." I hung up. The dripping sound was louder now, constant. I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw water streaming down the inside of the rear windows, running in thin rivulets like rain on glass. But it was coming from inside the van, from the cargo area, from beneath the gurney. I didn't stop again. I drove the remaining 30 miles with water sloshing under my feet, the dripping sound filling the cabin, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. When I finally pulled into the Oak Ridge lot at 1:43, the water was ankle deep in the front cabin. The funeral director came out to meet me. I opened the rear doors without saying a word. The body bag was dry. The gurney was dry. But the van floor was soaked, water dripping out onto the pavement in steady streams. The director stared. What happened? I didn't answer. I helped him unload the gurney, signed the transfer papers, and drove back to the depot. The water didn't drain. It stayed in the van for 2 full days, no matter how many times we vacuumed it out. I still drive transports, but I refuse drowning victims now. And when I pass the Bajordan River at night, I keep my windows up, because sometimes I still hear it, the dripping, even when the van is empty. I thought I knew every mile of that highway until the road forgot how to end. My name is Renee Castellanos, and I've been an overnight transport driver for Fairview Memorial Services in Springfield, Illinois, for the past 6 years. I know Route 55 like I know my own reflection. Every exit, every rest stop, every mile marker between the city morgue and the state medical facility in Bloomington. It's a straight shot, 72 miles, usually 90 minutes depending on traffic. I've driven it so many times I could do it with my eyes closed. That confidence almost killed me. The call came in at 1:30 on a Thursday morning in late September. John Doe, unidentified male, mid-40s, found deceased in a downtown hotel room. No family, no identification, no one to claim him. He'd be going to the state facility for processing and potential identification through their database. Standard unclaimed transport. I'd done this exact run maybe 60 times before. I picked up the body at 2:15. The morgue attendant helped me load him into the van. He was lighter than I expected, thin, maybe 140 pounds. The body bag was sealed and tagged with the case number. I secured the gurney, did my safety check, and headed out onto Route 55. The highway was empty, just me, the broken white lines, and the darkness pressing in from both sides. No moon, no stars, just my headlights cutting through the black. I settled into the familiar rhythm, cruise control set at 65, hands loose on the wheel, eyes scanning the road ahead. At 240, I passed exit 44. It's a small exit, nothing special. Leads to a rural service road and a handful of farms. I'd passed it 1,000 times without thinking twice. I noted it the way you note anything familiar. A quick glance at the green sign, then back to the road. 5 minutes later, I passed exit 44 again. I felt my stomach drop. I glanced at the GPS mounted on my dashboard. It showed a straight line. Route 55, heading north. No loops, no turns. The blue dot representing my van moved steadily forward along the route, but the exit sign had just flashed past my window for the second time. Same faded green paint, same bent post, same gravel turnoff. I checked my odometer. It hadn't moved. I stared at the numbers. They showed the exact same mileage as 5 minutes ago. I tapped the display, thinking maybe it was frozen. The screen flickered but didn't change. I looked back at the road. My hands were shaking. 3 miles later, or what felt like 3 miles, I passed exit 44 again. This time, I slowed down. I read the sign carefully as I approached. Exit 44, County Road 7, same sign, same placement. I looked at my GPS, still showing a straight path north, still showing forward progress. But I'd just passed the same exit for the third time. I grabbed my phone and opened my map app. Same thing. Blue dot moving north, no loops, no deviations. But the highway felt wrong now. The darkness outside my windows seemed thicker. The road beneath my tires felt too smooth, too uniform, like I was driving on a painted surface instead of asphalt. I checked the clock, 2:53. Only 13 minutes since I'd left the city. But I should have been near exit 50 by now, should have been halfway to Bloomington. Instead, I was somehow still circling the same 3-mile stretch of highway. I passed exit 44 a fourth time, then a fifth. My breath started coming faster. I pressed harder on the accelerator. 70, 75, 80. The van hummed beneath me, engine straining, but the scenery outside didn't change. Same darkness, same empty fields, same reflective markers on the shoulder blurring past in identical intervals. I thought about pulling over, about stopping the van and getting out and figuring out what was happening, but something deep in my chest told me that was a bad idea, that stopping meant I'd never start moving again. So I kept driving. I passed exit 44 a sixth time, a seventh. I lost count after that. The clock kept moving, 3:05, 3:12, 3:20, but the highway stayed the same. My fuel gauge hadn't dropped. My odometer hadn't changed. The GPS insisted I was making progress, but the exit sign kept appearing in my headlights like a recurring nightmare. At 3:37, I started crying. Not loud, just quiet tears running down my face. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. My eyes burned from staring at the same stretch of road. I tried calling dispatch. No signal. I tried my emergency contact. No signal. The phone worked. The screen lit up. Apps opened. But every call dropped before the first ring. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The body bag was still there. Secure. Still, but for the first time all night, I wondered who was in there, what his name had been, where he'd been trying to go before he died. At 4:02, something changed. I passed exit 44 again, but this time there was a car pulled over on the shoulder, headlights off, just sitting there in the darkness. I slowed down instinctively, checking for signs of distress. As I passed, I saw someone standing next to the driver's side door, a man in a dark jacket. He was facing the highway, facing me. I couldn't see his face, but I could see his posture, rigid, waiting like he'd been there a long time. I sped up, pressed the accelerator to the floor. The van surged forward, engine roaring. I passed exit 44 three more times. Each time, the car was still there. Each time, the man was standing in the same position, watching. At 4:38, I passed exit 45. It appeared suddenly, without warning. The next exit. Different sign, different number. The GPS blinked, recalibrated, and showed me back on course. I nearly sobbed with relief. I checked my odometer. It had jumped forward 20 miles. I arrived at the state facility at 5:43, 2 hours late. The attendant asked what took so long. I told him traffic. He didn't question it. When I unloaded the gurney, I looked at the body bag tag. The case number was different from the one I'd been given. I checked my paperwork. The name wasn't John Doe anymore. It was someone else, someone with a full name, a birth date, a listed cause of death. The attendant noticed me staring. Something wrong? I told him no, signed the transfer form, drove back to Springfield in silence. I still drive Route 55, but I don't transport unclaimed bodies anymore. And when I pass exit 44 now, I keep my eyes forward, because 3 weeks ago, I saw that car again. Same shoulder, same position, but this time, the man was gone, and there was a body bag lying in the grass beside it. I thought I understood silence until I heard the sound that shouldn't exist coming from a sealed body bag. My name is Jerome Whitfield, and I've worked as a transport specialist for Meadowbrook Mortuary Services in rural Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, for the past 14 years. My territory covers a 50-mile radius of farmland, small towns, and back roads that barely show up on GPS. Most of my pickups happen in people's homes, hospice patients who pass peacefully, elderly folks who die in their sleep, occasionally someone younger taken by accident or sudden illness. It's quiet work, respectful work. You learn to move through grief like water, present but not intrusive, professional but kind. You also learn to recognize the sounds of death. The silence in a room after someone's gone. The particular quality of stillness that settles over a body. The way houses seem to hold their breath. but I'd never heard of anything like the sound that came from the back of my van that October night. The call came through at 11:45. Female patient, 87 years old, natural causes. Farmhouse about 30 miles west of town, down a series of county roads I'd traveled maybe a dozen times over the years. Family was present. Everything was already arranged. I'd be transporting her to Meadowbrook for preparation and viewing. Standard pickup, standard transport. I arrived at 12:20. The farmhouse was small and weathered, surrounded by empty fields and a few scattered trees. The family met me at the door. 2 daughters, both in their 50s, and a son-in-law. They were composed but tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from sitting vigil for days. They showed me to the bedroom where their mother lay. She looked peaceful, small. The daughters had already dressed her in the clothes she'd wanted. They'd brushed her hair. It was clear she'd been deeply loved. I brought in the gurney, and with the son-in-law's help, we carefully transferred her into the body bag. The daughters stood in the doorway, holding each other. I sealed the bag, secured the straps, and wheeled her out to the van. The family followed. One of the daughters placed a small bouquet of lavender on top of the bag before I closed the doors. "Take care of her," she said. I told her I would. The drive back to Meadowbrook would take about 45 minutes. The roads were empty, just me, the darkness, and the low rumble of the van's engine. I kept my speed steady, avoiding potholes and rough patches. You learn to drive differently when you're carrying someone. Gentler, more deliberate. At mile 7, I heard it. A low hum, rhythmic, almost musical, coming from the back of the van. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but I couldn't see anything in the dark cargo area. I told myself it was the engine. Some mechanical vibration I hadn't noticed before, but the pitch was wrong, too organic, too steady. It rose and fell in a pattern that felt deliberate, intentional. I kept driving. At mile 12, the hum grew louder, not by much, still soft, still rhythmic, but distinct enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I pulled over onto a gravel turnout, put the van in park, and sat there listening. The hum continued, low and constant, coming from directly behind my seat, from the cargo area, from the body bag. I grabbed my flashlight, got out, and opened the rear doors. The body bag was exactly where I'd left it. Straps secure, zipper sealed, the lavender bouquet still resting on top. I leaned in and listened. Silence. I stood there for a full minute, barely breathing, waiting for the sound to return. Nothing, just the faint rustle of wind through the empty fields and the distant call of some night bird. I checked the gurney locks. I checked the bag seal. Everything was in place. I closed the doors, got back in the driver's seat, and started driving again. The hum returned immediately. This time, I didn't stop. I kept my hands on the wheel, my eyes on the road, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. A mechanical issue, an auditory illusion, fatigue playing tricks. But the sound was too clear, too present. It hummed beneath the engine noise, constant and unchanging, like someone in the back was humming a lullaby they couldn't quite remember. At mile 18, I pulled over again. I had to. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt tight. I got out, walked to the back, and flung the doors open without hesitation this time. The hum stopped the instant the doors opened. I stared at the body bag. Lavender still in place, everything still sealed. I reached out and touched the bag with my palm. It was cold, firm, completely still. I pressed my ear against it, listening for anything: breath, movement, some internal vibration. Nothing. I closed the doors and got back in the van. The hum started again before I'd even turned the key. I drove the remaining 27 miles without stopping. The hum followed me the entire way, rising and falling in that same rhythmic pattern, never quite loud enough to drown out my thoughts, but never quiet enough to ignore. I kept the windows down. I turned the radio on. I tried talking to myself. Nothing helped. When I finally pulled into the Meadowbrook lot at 1:50, my shirt was soaked with sweat. The funeral director, a man named Mitchell I'd worked with for years, came out to help me unload. He noticed my expression immediately. "You okay, Jerome?" I nodded, told him I was fine. We wheeled the gurney into the preparation room together. Mitchell began his intake process, checking the seal, verifying the paperwork, preparing the embalming station. I stood by the door, watching. The soup's hum had stopped the moment we entered the funeral home parking lot. I hadn't realized it until the silence that settled over me. It felt heavy, wrong. Mitchell glanced at me. "You sure you're all right?" I told him yes, signed the transfer log, started to leave. As I reached the door, Mitchell called out, "Hey, Jerome, you know anything about this woman?" I turned. Just that she died at home. Natural causes? Why? He was looking at the intake form. Says here she was a music teacher, taught piano and voice for 40 years. He paused, specialized in lullabies for children. I felt the cold settle into my bones. I still work transports. I still drive those back roads at night. But I don't listen to silence anymore. I keep the radio on now, always. Because 3 weeks after that pickup, I transported another body, different patient, different family, different circumstances, and halfway through the drive, I heard it again. That same low hum, rhythmic, musical, and this time I recognized the melody. I was trained to check body temperature during long transports until the night those checks started giving me answers I couldn't explain. My name is Alicia Brennan, and I've been a transport driver for Crossroads Memorial Services in Boise, Idaho, for the past 8 years. Long-distance transport is my specialty. I handle the runs that cross state lines, the 4-hour drives through mountain passes, and empty stretches of desert highway. The work requires attention to detail and adherence to protocol. Temperature checks every 90 minutes. Documentation at every stop. Professional conduct at all times. I've followed these rules without question since my first week on the job. That changed on a February night when the temperature readings stopped making sense. The call came through at 9:30. Male patient, 56 years old, sudden cardiac event. I'd be picking him up from a rural hospital in Twin Falls and transporting him to a funeral home in Spokane, Washington. 6-hour drive. 3 scheduled stops for temperature verification. Standard long distance protocol. I'd done this exact route at least 20 times. I arrived at the hospital at 10:15. The night nurse helped me load the body. He was a large man, maybe 220 pounds. We secured him carefully in the body bag, transferred him to the gurney, and locked everything into place in my van. The nurse handed me the release forms and the small logbook where I'd record my temperature checks. "Drive safe," she said. "Roads are clear, but it's cold out there." I thanked her and headed north on Highway 93. The first hour was routine. Empty highway, clear skies, temperature gauge in the van holding steady at 36 degrees Fahrenheit. I kept my speed at a comfortable 65 and settled into the familiar rhythm of night driving. At mile marker 87, I pulled into a rest area for my first mandatory check. I grabbed my digital thermometer and logbook, walked to the back of the van, and opened the rear doors. The body bag was secure and properly positioned. I unzipped a small section near the hand, the designated checkpoint, and inserted the thermometer probe against the palm. The device beeped after 15 seconds. 34 degrees Fahrenheit. I recorded it in the logbook. Normal morgue cold. Exactly what I expected. I re-zipped the bag, closed the doors, and continued driving. The second check came 90 minutes later at a small gas station outside of Chalice. I parked under a flickering streetlight, grabbed my equipment, and went through the same process. Unzip, insert probe, wait for the beep, 38 degrees. I stared at the display. That was warmer than the first reading, not by much, just 4 degrees, but enough to notice. I frowned and checked the van's interior temperature, still 36. I checked the seal on the body bag, intact, no air leaks, no external heat source. I told myself it was a calibration error. Feston, thermometers picking up residual warmth from my hand or the fabric. I recorded the reading and made a note to have the device checked when I got back to the depot. Then I got back on the road. The third check should have been at a rest stop near Salmon, but I was making good time and decided to push through to the next town. By the time I pulled over, it was nearly 2 in the morning. The temperature outside had dropped to 18 degrees. I could see my breath in white clouds as I walked to the back of the van. I opened the doors, unzipped the designated section, positioned the probe against the palm. The device beeped. 42 degrees. My hands started shaking. That was 8 degrees warmer than an hour and a half ago, 12 degrees warmer than the first check. Bodies don't warm up during transport. They cool down. That's basic biology, basic physics. The van was cold. The night was freezing. There was no possible explanations for the temperature to be rising. I checked the thermometer again. The display was clear, 42 degrees. I pressed the probe against the palm a second time, waiting for a different result. The device beeped again, same reading. I stood there in the cold, staring at the body bag. The hand beneath the vinyl felt firm. Still, normal, but the numbers didn't lie. Something was wrong. I pulled out my phone and called my supervisor. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried the emergency line, Same result. I was on my own. I recorded the reading in the logbook with a shaking hand. Added a note. Unusual temperature increase. Continuing transport. Then I closed the doors and got back in the driver's seat. I sat there for a long moment, engine running, heat blasting, trying to think logically. Equipment malfunction. That was the only explanation that made sense. I'd document everything and have the van inspected when I returned. I didn't do a fourth check. I told myself it was because I was ahead of schedule, that I wanted to complete the transport quickly and get the body to the funeral home where professionals could take over. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid of what the thermometer would show, afraid that the number would keep climbing. I drove the remaining 2 hours without stopping. I kept the radio loud and the windows cracked, letting the freezing air rush through the cabin. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't think about the hand in the body bag or the impossible warmth spreading through dead tissue. When I finally pulled into the Spokane funeral home at 4:38, the director was waiting. He helped me unload the gurney without comment. We wheeled it into the preparation room, and he began his intake procedures. I handed him the logbook. He glanced at the temperature readings, frowned. These numbers are unusual. I nodded, told him I thought my equipment was malfunctioning. He looked at me for a long moment, then back at the logbook. We'll verify with our own thermometer. He unzipped the section near the hand and inserted his probe. The device beeped. 92 degrees, he said quietly. My stomach dropped. That was almost body temperature, almost alive. The director looked at me. How long has it been since your last check? I told him 2 hours. He nodded slowly, then checked the bag seal. Everything looks secure, no contamination, no external heat source. He paused. Sometimes bodies retain heat longer than expected, especially with sudden cardiac events. The heart stops, but cellular activity continues for a while. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to accept that simple, rational explanation, but I'd transported cardiac cases before, dozens of them, and I'd never seen temperature readings climb like that. Never seen a body get warmer over 6 hours in a refrigerated van. I signed the transfer papers and left. I still work long-distance transports. I still follow protocol, but I don't do temperature checks anymore. I log the first one, always normal, always cold, and then I skip the rest. I document equipment failure in my notes and continue driving, because 3 weeks after that February night, I transported another body, different patient, different circumstances. And at my second temperature check, the reading came back at 41 degrees. I closed the doors without recording it, and I felt something brush against my hand through the vinyl. Something warm, something that pressed back. The shift was routine until my GPS decided I needed to attend a funeral that shouldn't exist. My name is Ben Kowalski, and I've been a body transport driver for Lakeside Memorial Services in Green Bay, Wisconsin for the past 12 years. I know every route in my territory, every highway, every side street, every shortcut through residential neighborhoods. I trust my instincts more than my GPS, but company policy requires us to keep it running for insurance purposes. It logs our routes, tracks our mileage, creates a digital record of every trip. In 12 years, I'd never had a problem with it, until the night it led me somewhere I was never supposed to go. The call came in at 1:45 on a Saturday morning in April. Female patient, 68 years old, natural causes, home death. I'd be picking her up from a residence on the east side and transporting her to Lakeside for preparation. 30-minute drive, maybe 40, with the route I usually took. Simple, straightforward. I arrived at the house at 2:20. The family was waiting. Her husband, 2 adult sons, and a daughter. They were quiet but composed. I could tell they'd been expecting this. They showed me to the bedroom where she lay, peaceful and still, her hands folded over her chest. We moved her carefully into the body bag. The daughter placed a small cross inside before I sealed it. She wanted to be at Lakeside, the husband said. His voice was rough. She planned everything herself. I told him she'd be taken care of. We loaded her into my van, and I secured the gurney properly. The family stood in the driveway as I pulled away. I could see them in my rearview mirror, huddled together under the porch light, getting smaller as I drove. I headed west on Sherman Avenue like I always did. The GPS showed my usual route, left on Webster, straight through downtown, right on Bay Street, then north to Lakeside. 28 minutes, but as I approached the intersection at Webster, the screen flickered. Reroute ahead, the automated voice announced. Road closure detected. I glanced at the screen. A red line had appeared across Sherman Avenue, blocking my usual path. The GPS recalculated, showing a new route through a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I frowned. There hadn't been any closure notices, no construction signs, no detour markers, but the GPS was insistent. Turn right in 200 feet. I hesitated, then followed the instruction. Company policy. Trust the GPS. Document everything. I turned right onto a narrow residential street I'd never driven before. Small houses, chain-link fences, trees overhanging the road. The GPS led me through a series of turns, left, right, straight, left again, until I was completely disoriented. Continue straight for 1.2 miles. The neighborhood changed as I drove. The houses got older, smaller. Some had boarded windows. Empty lots appeared between buildings, overgrown with weeds and scattered debris. The streetlights were fewer and dimmer. I checked my phone's map app. It showed me on a completely different street than the GPS indicated. The blue dot representing my van was sitting in the middle of a blank space on the map. No street name, no landmarks. Destination ahead on right. I looked up. There was a church at the end of the block. Small, white clapboard, a wooden steeple with a simple cross on top. And in the parking lot, under harsh fluorescent lights, there was a hearse. I felt my chest tighten. The GPS voice spoke again. You have arrived at your destination. But my destination was Lakeside Memorial, not a church, not this church. I pulled to the curb and stared at the building. The front doors were open, light spilled out onto the steps, and I could hear music, soft, organ music, playing inside. I checked my phone, 2:48 in the morning. No church held services at this hour, but the music continued, and through the open doors I could see people moving inside, shadows shifting, the silhouettes of mourners. I got out of the van. My legs felt unsteady. I walked slowly toward the church, my footsteps loud on the empty street. As I got closer, I could hear voices singing a hymn I didn't recognize. The melody was old, mournful. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. The hearse was parked directly in front of me, black, polished. The rear door was open, and on the side panel, in elegant gold lettering, I saw a name, the same name on the body bag in my van. My hands started shaking. I looked back at my vehicle, then at the church. The music swelled. I could see movement inside now. People in dark clothing filling the pews, heads bowed, a casket at the front of the sanctuary surrounded by white flowers. I pulled out my phone and called Lakeside. The night attendant answered on the second ring. Ben, you close? I told him I'd been rerouted, that I was at a church I didn't recognize. He asked for the address. I didn't have one. I described the location. He was quiet for a moment. Ben, there's no church on the east side, not matching that description. Where are you exactly? I walked to the nearest street sign. The post was rusted, the lettering faded. I could barely make out the name. When I told him, he went silent. That street doesn't exist anymore. It was demolished 8 years ago for the highway expansion. I looked at the church. The music was still playing, the doors still open, the hearse still parked in front. Ben, get out of there. Follow your phone's GPS. Ignore the van's system. I walked back to my van, climbed inside, and pulled up my phone's map. It showed a clear route back to Sherman Avenue, back to my original path. I started the engine. The van's GPS screen flickered. Reroute ahead, road closure. I turned it off, followed my phone instead. Within 2 minutes, I was back on Sherman Avenue. The church disappeared behind me, but I could still hear the music faintly through my closed windows. That slow, mournful hymn arrived at Lakeside at 3:15. The attendant helped me unload. He didn't ask about the delay. I didn't offer an explanation, but as we wheeled the gurney inside, he paused. Ben, this woman, she planned her whole funeral, picked the music, the church, everything. Family said she was very specific. I nodded, didn't say anything. She wanted it held at Old Grace Church, the one that used to be on the east side, before they tore it down. My blood went cold. She died before it was demolished. Always said she wanted her service there. Family had to settle for somewhere else. I signed the transfer papers in silence and left. I still drive transports. I still follow my routes, but I don't use the van's GPS anymore. I drive by memory, by instinct. And when I pass the lot where Old Grace Church used to stand, just empty asphalt and weeds now, I keep my windows up, because sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that organ playing, and I know exactly whose funeral it's for. I thought numbers never lied until the odometer told me I'd driven somewhere I couldn't remember. My name is Sasha Petrov, and I've worked as a transport coordinator for Highland Memorial Services in Asheville, North Carolina, for nearly 10 years. Coordination means documentation. Every mile logged, every stop recorded, every fuel receipt saved. Insurance requires it. Company policy demands it. I've built my reputation on precision. My logs are always accurate. My paperwork always matches. My numbers never contradict each other. That perfect record ended on a Wednesday night in November when my van drove 40 miles I can't account for. The call came through at 10:30. Male patient, 47 years old, motorcycle accident. Fatal. I'd be picking him up from Mission Hospital downtown and transporting him to Highland Memorial about 40 miles west. It was a route I'd driven hundreds of times. Straight shot on Interstate 40, 50 minutes in good traffic, maybe an hour at night. I arrived at the hospital at 11:10. Before going inside, I did what I always do. I logged my odometer reading in my trip journal. 82,346 miles. I noted the time, the location, and the purpose. Standard procedure. Then I went inside to coordinate with the hospital staff. The transfer took 20 minutes. The body was ready, paperwork complete. The night nurse helped me load him onto the gurney. He was wearing a hospital gown, his personal effects bagged and tagged. His face was covered, but I could see the outline of significant trauma. The nurse's expression told me it had been a hard death. We loaded him into my van. I secured the gurney, locked the rear doors, and climbed back into the driver's seat. Before starting the engine, I recorded the new odometer reading in my journal. 82,346 miles, same as before. I noted the departure time, 11:32, and pulled out of the hospital loading bay. The drive started normally. I merged onto Interstate 40 heading west. Light traffic, clear roads. The dashboard clock showed 11:40. I settled into my usual driving pattern, cruise control at 68, staying in the right lane, monitoring my mirrors. The mountains rose dark on either side of the highway. I remember passing the Enka exit. I remember checking my fuel gauge, 3/4 full. I remember adjusting the temperature because the cabin felt cold. And then I remember arriving at Highland Memorial. That's the part that doesn't make sense. There's no gap in my memory, no missing time, no moment of confusion or disorientation. I was driving, and then I was pulling into the Highland parking lot. Continuous, seamless, normal. I parked in the loading zone and checked the dashboard clock. 12:43. I'd been driving for an hour and 11 minutes. That was longer than usual, but not dramatically so. Maybe I'd hit some traffic. Maybe I'd driven slower without realizing it. I grabbed my journal and noted the arrival time. Then I checked the odometer, 82,426 miles. I stared at the numbers. That was 80 miles. I'd driven 80 miles, but the distance from Mission Hospital to Highland Memorial was 40 miles. I'd made that drive so many times I knew it by heart. 40 miles, not 80. I checked my fuel gauge. It showed just over half a tank. That matched 80 miles of driving, not 40. I opened my journal and rechecked my departure mileage. 82,346. I looked at the odometer again. 82,426. The math was clear, undeniable. I had driven 80 miles. The funeral director came out to meet me. His name was Robert. We'd worked together for years. He helped me unload the gurney, and we wheeled it inside. He signed the transfer log, and I stood there, trying to make sense of the numbers. "Everything okay, Sasha?" he asked. I told him yes, but I couldn't stop thinking about the mileage. I walked back to my van and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the odometer. The numbers hadn't changed. 82,426. I pulled up my GPS history on my phone. It showed a clean, straight line from Mission Hospital to Highland Memorial. Interstate 40, no detours, no side roads, no deviation from the direct route. Travel time 1 hour, 11 minutes. Distance 40 miles. But my fuel gauge said 80. My odometer said 80. The numbers were impossible to ignore. I drove back to the depot and filed my paperwork. I included both sets of numbers, the GPS distance and the odometer reading, with a note about the discrepancy. My supervisor called me into his office the next morning. "Walk me through last night's transport," he said. I told him everything: the pickup time, the route, the arrival, the mileage difference. He pulled up the van's maintenance records. "Odometer's been accurate for 2 years. No reported issues." He looked at me. "Did you stop anywhere? Make any unscheduled detours?" I told him no. I had no memory of stopping, no memory of leaving the highway. The drive felt continuous, normal, but the numbers didn't lie. "And you don't remember anything unusual? Any gaps in time?" I shook my head. That was the part that bothered me most. There was no missing time, no confusion, just 40 extra miles I'd somehow driven without knowing it. My supervisor marked it as an equipment anomaly and told me to monitor the odometer on future trips. But I knew the equipment wasn't wrong. I checked it obsessively for the next 2 weeks. Every trip logged perfectly, every mile accounted for. The odometer was fine, until 3 weeks later when I transported another body on the same route. Mission Hospital to Highland Memorial. Same 40-mile drive. When I arrived and checked my odometer, it had added 76 miles. This time I checked my GPS history immediately. Same clean line, same direct route, same 40 miles. But the odometer and fuel gauge told a different story. I called my supervisor from the parking lot. He told me to bring the van in for a full diagnostic. They checked everything: the odometer, the GPS, the computer systems, no malfunctions, no errors, everything functioning normally. "Maybe you're getting distracted," my supervisor suggested, "taking routes you don't remember." But I knew that wasn't true. I had no memory of stopping, no memory of turning, no memory of anything except the straight, continuous drive on Interstate 40. I still work transports. I still drive that route, but I don't log my odometer readings anymore. I document GPS distances only and note equipment variance in my reports. Company policy accepts it. No one asks questions. But I know the truth. Somewhere between Mission Hospital and Highland Memorial, I drive twice as far as I should, and I have no memory of where I go. Last week, I transported another body. Same route. When I arrived, the odometer showed 94 extra miles, And this time, when I checked my tires, they were covered in red clay. The highway is asphalt. There's no red clay anywhere on Interstate 40. I didn't ask where it came from. I never should have ignored those 3 knocks, not after I learned what they meant. My name is Isaiah Torres, and I've been a body transport driver for Serenity Memorial Services in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for the past 13 years. The work has taught me many things: how to drive smoothly over rough roads, how to speak with grieving families, how to maintain composure when you're alone at 3 in the morning with death in the back of your van. But the most important lesson I learned came too late. Some sounds mean something, and when you hear them, you should listen. The call came through at midnight on a Friday in late March. Female patient, 79 years old, congestive heart failure. She'd passed at home with hospice care. I'd be picking her up from a residence in the North Valley and transporting her to Serenity Memorial, downtown. 40-minute drive, standard procedure. I arrived at the house at 12:35. It was a small adobe home with a neat yard and wind chimes hanging from the porch. The family was waiting, a daughter in her 50s and a son-in-law. They were tired but calm. The daughter met me at the door. "Thank you for coming so late," she said. "Mom wouldn't have wanted to wait until morning." I told her it was no problem. She led me inside to a bedroom where her mother lay. The room smelled like lavender and old books. Photographs covered every surface: children, grandchildren, holidays. A life fully lived. The daughter touched her mother's hand one last time before stepping back to let me work. We transferred her carefully into the body bag. The daughter watched without crying, her arms wrapped around herself. As I sealed the bag, she spoke quietly. She used to knock 3 times on my bedroom door every morning to wake me up for school. 3 knocks, always the same pattern. She did it my whole childhood. I nodded. Families often shared these small details. It helped them process. It helped them remember. Even after I moved out, when I'd visit, I'd hear those 3 knocks in the morning. She never stopped. I told her those memories were precious. We wheeled the gurney out to my van, and I secured everything properly. The daughter stood in the driveway, watching. The wind chimes made soft metallic sounds in the breeze. "Take care of her," she said. I promised I would. The drive started quietly. I headed south on 4th Street, taking my usual route through the North Valley. Empty roads, street lights casting orange pools on the pavement. The van's engine hummed steadily. I kept my speed careful and even, mindful of every bump and turn. At mile marker 12, I heard it. 3 knocks, soft but distinct, coming from the cargo area behind me. Knock, knock, knock. Evenly spaced, deliberate, the same rhythm you'd use on a bedroom door. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing visible in the dark cargo area. I told myself it was road noise, something shifting in the van, a mechanical sound I'd misinterpreted. I kept driving. 2 minutes later, I heard it again. Knock, 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 the same pattern, the same soft, deliberate sound, like knuckles against wood, but there was no wood in the cargo area, just metal walls and the vinyl body bag. I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put the van in park, sat there in the silence listening. Nothing, just the idle of the engine and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. I grabbed my flashlight, got out, and opened the rear doors. The body bag was exactly where I'd left it, straps secure, gurney locked in place. Nothing had moved, nothing had shifted. I stood there for a long moment, shining the light around the empty cargo area, looking for loose equipment or anything that could explain the sound. There was nothing. I closed the doors and got back in the driver's seat, told myself I was tired, that my mind was playing tricks. I started driving again. The knocks came 5 minutes later. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I didn't stop. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel, my breathing controlled. The sound came from directly behind my seat, from the partition separating me from the cargo area. 3 soft knocks, perfectly spaced, like someone asking politely for my attention. I turned the radio on, found a news station, turned the volume up. The knocks continued underneath the voices and static. Knock, knock, knock. I drove faster, not reckless, but urgent. I needed to get to the funeral home, needed to complete the transport, needed to hand this over to someone else. The knocks followed me through every mile, sometimes minutes apart, sometimes closer together, always the same pattern, always 3. When I finally pulled into the Serenity Memorial parking lot at 1:27, my shirt was soaked with sweat. The funeral director, a woman named Patricia I'd worked with for years, came out to meet me. She saw my face and frowned. "Isaiah, you look pale." I told her I was fine, helped her unload the gurney. We wheeled it into the preparation room, and she began her intake procedures. I stood by the door, watching her work. She checked the body bag seal, verified the paperwork, and started making notes in her logbook. "Did the family mention anything unusual about the deceased?" she asked without looking up. I told her no, just that she'd been in hospice, that the death was expected. Patricia nodded. They called ahead. The daughter wanted to make sure we knew something. She glanced at her notes. Apparently, the mother had a habit. She used to knock 3 times on her daughter's door every morning to wake her up. Same pattern every day for years. My blood went cold. Patricia continued. The daughter said it was important, that her mom was very particular about it. 3 knocks, always the same rhythm. She wanted us to understand how specific her mother was about patterns and routines. I signed the transfer papers with a shaking hand and left without another word. I still work transports. I still take late night calls. But when I hear sounds from the cargo area now, I don't dismiss them as mechanical noise. I don't tell myself I'm tired or imagining things. Because 2 weeks after that March night, I transported another body. Different patient, different family, different circumstances, and halfway through the drive, I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. When I delivered the body, the funeral director mentioned something the family had shared. The deceased used to tap 3 times on the dinner table when he wanted everyone's attention. 3 taps. Always the same pattern, a lifelong habit. I don't ignore the knocks anymore, but I don't respond to them either, because I'm afraid that if I acknowledge them, if I answer those soft, patient, deliberate knocks, something will answer back, and it won't be asking permission. I thought silence was the worst thing you could hear during a transport, until a voice came through the static asking if we were almost there. My name is Molly Sutherland, and I've been a transport driver for Riverbend Memorial Services in Portland, Oregon for the past 9 years. Night driving is lonely work. Empty highways, dark roads, hours of silence broken only by the hum of your engine and your own thoughts. Most drivers handle the isolation differently. Some talk to themselves, some listen to podcasts, some drive in complete silence. I always played the same classic rock station, 94.7. It was my constant companion. Familiar songs, predictable DJ banter, a thread of normalcy connecting me to the waking world. I never changed the station, not once in 9 years. That changed on a Thursday night in October when the radio decided to talk back. The call came through at 11:45. Male patient, 62 years old, stroke. He'd passed at Providence Hospital and needed transport to Riverbend Memorial, about 90 minutes north. Standard overnight run. I'd done it 100 times before. I picked up the body at 12:30. The hospital staff helped me load him onto the gurney. The paperwork was straightforward. No complications. No special requests from the family. Just a quiet death and a routine transport. We secured him in the van, and I headed north on Interstate 5. I turned on the radio before merging onto the highway. 94.7, like always. A Fleetwood Mac song was playing. I knew every word. I let the music wash over me, settling into the familiar rhythm of night driving. The dashboard lights glowed soft green. The road stretched empty ahead. At mile marker 32, the song cut out, just stopped, mid-chorus, replaced instantly by static, harsh, crackling white noise that filled the cabin. I frowned and checked the radio display, still tuned to 94.7, still showing the station name and frequency, but only static coming through. I pressed the seek button. The radio scanned through frequencies, finding nothing but more static. I manually tuned to other stations I knew, 91.5, 100.3, 105.1, all static, every single frequency. I turned the radio off. The sudden silence felt heavier than the static. I drove for another 5 miles in that quiet, then reached out and turned it back on. Maybe it had been a dead zone. Maybe I'd passed through some interference. The static returned immediately, but underneath it, faint and distorted, I heard something else. A voice, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I turned the volume up slightly, trying to isolate the sound. The voice became clearer, calm, polite, almost conversational. Are we almost there? My hands jerked on the wheel. The van swerved slightly before I corrected. I stared at the radio display. The voice had been clear, distinct, not part of any song or broadcast. Just that simple question, asked as casually as a passenger might ask during a long drive. I reached out and turned the radio off. The silence pressed in around me. My heart was hammering. I told myself I'd misheard, that my tired brain had assembled meaning from random static, that there was no voice, no question, nothing but interference and exhaustion. I drove another 10 miles in silence. The road was completely empty. No other cars, no lights except my own headlights and the occasional reflective marker on the shoulder. I kept glancing at the radio, at the dark, silent display. I turned it back on, static, immediate, and harsh. And then, underneath it, that same voice, clearer this time, more present. Are we almost there? I grabbed the power knob and twisted it off so hard it clicked. The silence that followed felt wrong, too complete, too heavy. I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to exhale slowly. I left the radio off for the next 20 miles. Just drove in that oppressive quiet, my hands tight on the wheel, my eyes locked on the road ahead. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing at the radio, at the dark display, waiting for it to turn itself on, waiting for that voice to come back without my permission. It didn't, but at mile marker 68, with the radio still off, I heard it anyway. Are we almost there? The voice came from the dashboard, from the speakers, clear and close and impossible because the radio was off, the power was off, nothing was playing, but the voice was there, calm and patient, asking its simple question. My foot hit the brake without my conscious decision. The van slowed, pulled onto the shoulder, came to a stop. I sat there in the silence, engine idling, hazard lights flashing. The radio display was still dark, still off, but I could feel something in the cabin with me, a presence, an attention. Pulled out my phone and called my supervisor. It rang twice before he answered. Molly, everything okay? I told him about the voice, about the radio, about the question that kept repeating. He was quiet for a long moment. Where are you right now? I told him my location, mile marker 68, Interstate 5 northbound. How much further to Riverbend? About 25 miles, I told him. Just finish the transport. Get the body to us. Don't stop again. He hung up. I sat there on the shoulder, staring at the dark radio. Then I put the van in drive and pulled back onto the highway. I didn't turn the radio back on. I drove in complete silence, my jaw clenched, my shoulders rigid. The voice didn't return, not through the speakers. But at mile marker 83, I heard something else. A soft sound from the cargo area, like fabric rustling, like someone shifting position on a gurney. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't check the cargo area. I just drove. When I finally pulled into the Riverbend parking lot at 2:47, my supervisor was waiting. He helped me unload without comment. We wheeled the gurney into the preparation room, and he signed the transfer log. He looked at me with concern. You should go home. Get some rest. I nodded, walked back to my van, climbed into the driver's seat, sat there for a long moment before starting the engine. The radio turned itself on, not static this time, just a song, a Fleetwood Mac song, the same one that had been playing when the static first started. Picked up exactly where it had cut off 2 hours earlier, as if no time had passed, as if nothing had happened. I turned it off and drove back to the depot in silence. I still work transports. I still drive those overnight runs, but I don't listen to music anymore. I keep the radio off, always off. And when the silence gets too heavy, when the isolation starts pressing in, I remind myself that silence is safer. Because 2 weeks after that October night, I transported another body, different patient, different route, and halfway through the drive, with the radio off and the van completely silent, I heard it again. Are we almost there? This time, I didn't answer, but something in the cargo area shifted, and in the rearview mirror, I saw the body bag move, just slightly, just enough, like someone sitting up to look out the window. I thought I knew every address in my territory until my phone led me to a door that shouldn't exist. My name is Colin Hendricks, and I've been a body transport driver for Westfield Memorial Services in rural Kansas for the past 7 years. Rural transport is different from city work. Addresses are vague. GPS signals are unreliable. You learn to navigate by landmarks, old barns, water towers, the Miller farm, the intersection with the broken stoplight. You learn to trust dispatch and verify everything twice. And you learn that when something doesn't make sense, you stop and figure it out before proceeding. I broke that rule on a Tuesday night in September, and I found something I was never supposed to see. The call came through at 1:15, male patient, 83 years old, natural causes, home death. The address was listed as 1247 Riverside Road. I knew Riverside, a long county road that ran parallel to the creek for about 8 miles, farmhouses scattered every mile or so. I'd done pickups out there before. I pulled up the address on my phone and started driving. The route looked straightforward, 23 minutes from the depot. I headed east on Highway 56, then turned north onto Riverside. The road was empty, no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness and the occasional mailbox appearing in the beam. At 12:39, my phone's GPS announced I'd arrived at my destination. I looked around. There was nothing there. Just an empty field on my right and dense brush on my left. No house, no driveway, no mailbox. I checked the address again. 1247 Riverside Road. I was in the right location according to GPS, but there was no structure of any kind. I called dispatch. The night operator answered on the second ring. Hey, Colin, what's up? I told her I couldn't find the address. She confirmed the location and said the family had called it in 2 hours ago. She read me the exact same address I had, 1247 Riverside Road. Maybe you passed it, she suggested. I told her I'd check. I drove another mile north, turned around, and came back slowly, scanning both sides of the road. Nothing, just empty field and brush. I parked at the GPS coordinates again and got out of the van. The night was cold, silent except for the creek running somewhere in the darkness. I pulled out my flashlight and swept the beam across the field. Nothing but tall grass and a few scattered trees. I turned toward the brush on the left side of the road. My phone buzzed. A text notification from dispatch. Family says patient waiting inside. I stared at the message. Inside where? There was no building. I texted back explaining there was no structure at this location. The response came immediately. Address confirmed, 1247 Riverside. Check perimeter. I walked along the road's shoulder, shining my light into the brush. The vegetation was thick, sumac, wild roses, tangles of vine. Was about to give up when my light caught something. A narrow gap in the brush, almost hidden, like an old path that had grown over. I pushed through the vegetation, branches scraping against my jacket. After about 15 feet, the brush opened up, and there, partially hidden by overgrown trees and tall weeds, was a basement door. Not a house, not a building, just a door, set into a concrete frame that emerged from the ground at a 45-degree angle. Old-style storm cellar doors, the kind you'd see on farms built in the 1930s. Rusted metal painted dark green, a simple handle with a padlock that hung open. I stood there staring at it. This wasn't right. Dispatch had said a home death, a house, not a cellar door in an empty field. I checked my phone. The GPS pin was right on top of me. This was 1247 Riverside Road. My phone buzzed again. Patient waiting inside. I reached out and pulled the door handle. It opened with a metallic groan. Darkness beyond. Stone steps leading down. The air that came up smelled damp and earthy. I shined my flashlight down the stairs. They descended about 12 feet into what looked like a small underground room, and at the bottom I could see a gurney. My heart started pounding. There was a gurney down there, an actual medical gurney with a body bag on top of it, zipped and sealed, just sitting there in the darkness, waiting. I called dispatch again. This time a different voice answered. Male. I didn't recognize it. Colin, you find the location? I told him about the cellar, about the door, about the gurney already waiting inside. He was quiet for a moment. That's correct. Family prepared everything. Just need you to transport to Westfield. I asked him about the family. Where were they? Who had moved the body down there? Family already left. They prepared the patient for transport. Your job is just pickup and delivery. Something about his tone felt wrong, too calm, too rehearsed. I asked for the patient's name. He gave me a name I didn't recognize. I asked for a callback number for the family. He said it wasn't available in the system. Colin, you're on the clock. Just complete the pickup. He hung up. I stood there at the top of the stairs, looking down at the gurney. Every instinct told me to leave, to get back in my van and drive away. But I was on duty. I had a job to complete, and there was clearly a body down there that needed transport. I descended the stairs slowly. The underground room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. Concrete walls, dirt floor, no furniture except the gurney, no personal effects, no signs of life or habitation, just the body bag on the gurney, zipped and ready. I reached out and touched the bag. It was cold. I could feel the shape of a body inside. I grabbed the gurney handle and started pulling it toward the stairs. It rolled smoothly, like it had been recently maintained, too smoothly for something stored in an abandoned cellar. Getting the gurney up the stairs was difficult. I had to lift and pull, working it up one step at a time. When I finally got it to the top and out through the door, I was breathing hard. I rolled it to my van, loaded it inside, and secured it properly. Before leaving, I walked back to the cellar door and shined my light inside one more time. The room was empty now, just bare walls and that dirt floor. But something caught my eye. On the far wall, there were scratches in the concrete, lots of them, like someone had been marking days or counting something. I closed the door and got in my van. Called dispatch again, no answer. Tried 3 more times during the drive back to Westfield. No one picked up. When I arrived at the funeral home at 2:43, the night director was waiting. His name was Patterson. I'd worked with him before. "Took you long enough," he said. I helped him unload. He checked the body bag tag and frowned. "This isn't the patient we were expecting." I showed him my paperwork. Different name, different case number. He checked his records. "Colin, we don't have any scheduled pickups from Riverside tonight. This name isn't in our system." I pulled out my phone to show him the dispatch messages. They were gone, all of them, the entire conversation deleted. I checked my call log. No record of the calls, like they'd never happened. Patterson looked at me carefully. "Are you feeling all right?" I told him I was fine, signed the transfer papers with a shaking hand, and left. I still work transports. I still cover rural routes. But I won't go to Riverside Road anymore. I tell dispatch I'm unavailable for that area. They don't ask why. Because 2 weeks ago, I drove past that location during daylight. I stopped where the GPS coordinates had led me. The field was still empty, the brush was still thick, but when I walked the perimeter, I couldn't find the cellar door, couldn't find the path, couldn't find any evidence that anything had ever been there. Just empty field. And my phone showing 1247 Riverside Road right where I stood. I thought condensation came from temperature differences until I saw the handprint pressed against my window from the inside. My name is Tessa Morales, and I've been a body transport driver for Northern Lights Memorial Services in Duluth, Minnesota for the past 11 years. Winter shooting in Minnesota teaches you things. How to handle black ice, how to navigate through blizzards, how to keep your vehicle properly heated so pipes don't freeze and equipment doesn't fail. You learn the science of cold. Condensation forms when warm air meets cold surfaces. Ice builds up predictably. Everything follows the rules of physics. Until the night those rules stopped applying to my van. The call came through at 10:30 on a January night. A female patient, 54 years old, sudden cardiac event. I'd be picking her up from a medical examiner's office in Two Harbors and transporting her to Northern Lights in Duluth. 40-minute drive along Highway 61. The weather report showed clear skies, but brutal cold, 8 degrees below zero, with wind chill pushing it to -25. I arrived at the examiner's office at 11:15. The loading bay was heated, and we moved quickly to minimize exposure. The body was already prepared, bagged and tagged. The attendant helped me load her onto the gurney, and we secured everything properly. I did my visual check, closed the rear doors, and climbed into the driver's seat. The van's interior was warm. I'd left it running while I was inside. The temperature gauge showed 68 degrees. I put it in drive and headed south on Highway 61, just one, toward Duluth. The road was empty, just me and the darkness and the occasional ice fishing house visible out on the frozen lake. I kept my speed steady at 55, watching for deer and black ice. The heater hummed steadily, keeping the cabin comfortable. At mile marker 23, I noticed condensation forming on my rear window. Just a small patch at first. Fog clouding the glass in a circular pattern about the size of a dinner plate. I glanced at the temperature controls. Everything normal. Interior warm, exterior freezing. Condensation was natural in these conditions. I turned up the defroster slightly and kept driving. 2 minutes later, the condensation had spread. It now covered most of the rear window, thick and opaque. I frowned. The defroster should have been clearing it, not letting it worsen. I adjusted the controls again, directing more heat toward the back. The condensation got thicker. I could barely see through the rear window now, just a wall of white fog obscuring everything behind me. I checked the side mirrors, both clear. No condensation on any other windows, just the rear window, covered completely in thick moisture. At mile marker 19, I pulled over onto the shoulder. I left the engine running and got out. The cold hit me like a physical force. My breath came out in white clouds. I walked to the back of the van and looked at the rear window. From the outside, it was perfectly clear. No condensation, no fog, just clean glass reflecting the darkness. I could see straight through into the cargo area. The body bag was visible on the gurney, properly secured. I walked back to the driver's door and looked through my side window at the rear window. From this angle, from inside the van, it was completely fogged over. White, opaque, impossible to see through. I got back in the driver's seat. The rear window was still fogged. I reached back and touched the glass with my hand. It was cold, much colder than it should have been with the heater running, and the condensation was on the inside of the glass. On the cargo area side, not the driver's side. I sat there trying to understand. Condensation forms on the warmer side when warm air meets cold glass. But the cargo area wasn't warmer than the driver's cabin. It was the same temperature, regulated by the same heating system. There was no reason for moisture to form there. I reached back and wiped the glass with my hand. The condensation cleared where I touched, leaving a streak. Within seconds, it had reformed, thicker than before, and now I could see something else in the fog. Patterns, not random, deliberate, lines and curves forming in the moisture, like something was drawing in it from the cargo area side. My heart started hammering. I turned around fully in my seat, looking through the partition at the cargo area. The body bag was exactly where it should be. Nothing had moved, nothing had changed, but the condensation on the window continued to spread and shift, patterns emerging and fading in the white fog. I started driving again. I didn't know what else to do. I kept my eyes forward, on the road, trying not to look at the rearview mirror, but I could see the white fog in my peripheral vision, growing, spreading, moving in ways fog shouldn't move. At mile marker 12, I heard it, a soft sound, like a hand pressing against glass, a quiet squeak of squealing against moisture coming from the rear window. I didn't turn around. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The van sped up, 60 miles per hour. 65. The speed limit was 55, but I couldn't make myself slow down. The squeaking continued, rhythmic, deliberate, like someone pressing their palm against the inside of the window and dragging it slowly across the glass. I could hear the moisture moving, could hear the pattern of touch. At mile marker 8, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The condensation had cleared in one spot, just one small area, and in that clear space I could see a handprint, perfect and detailed, pressed against the glass from inside the cargo area. Palm, 4 fingers, thumb. The condensation was thick around it, framing it in white fog. I watched as another handprint appeared next to it, then another, pressing against the glass from the cargo area side, from where the body bag was, from where nothing living should be moving. I pulled into the Northern Lights parking lot at 11:58, going 40 miles per hour. I barely stopped before jumping out and running to the building. The night director, a man named Stevens, came out immediately. "Tessa, what's wrong?" I pointed at the van. He walked over and opened the rear doors. The body bag was secure, undisturbed. He checked everything carefully, then looked at me with concern. "Everything looks fine. What happened?" I walked to the rear of the van and looked at the window. Clear, perfectly clear. No condensation, no fog, no handprints, just clean glass. Stevens helped me unload. We completed the transfer in silence. I signed the paperwork with shaking hands and drove back to the depot. I still work transports. I still drive winter routes, but I removed the rear window from my van, told maintenance it was damaged and needed replacement. They installed a solid metal panel instead. No glass, no window, no way to see into the cargo area from the driver's seat. I tell myself it's for better insulation, better temperature control, better efficiency, but I know the truth. I removed it because 3 nights after that January transport, I was driving another body to Northern Lights. Different patient, different circumstances. And in my rearview mirror, I saw condensation forming again on the rear window. This time, the handprint appeared immediately, pressed flat against the glass. And then it moved, dragged slowly across the window, like someone in the back was waving, trying to get my attention. I installed the metal panel the next day. Every cemetery has a rule we don't talk about, but in transport work, the rule is simpler. You never pick up the same body twice. My name is Omar Hassan, and I've been a body transport driver for Gateway Memorial Services in St. Louis, Missouri for the past 10 years. The job is straightforward. You get a call, you verify the information, you complete the pickup, you deliver the body. One call, one transport, one completion. The system is designed to prevent errors, to ensure accountability, to make absolutely certain that every deceased person is tracked and documented at every step. That system failed on a Wednesday night in November when I received the same pickup request twice. The first call came through at 12:40. Male patient, 38 years old, overdose. The address was an apartment complex on the south side. Riverside Gardens, Unit 214. I'd been there before for other pickups. The building was old but maintained, mixed demographics, mostly working families and retirees. I arrived at 1:05. The police were already there. Two uniformed officers in the hallway outside Unit 214. One of them checked my credentials and let me inside. The apartment was small: living room, kitchen, bedroom. The deceased was in the bedroom, lying on the floor next to the bed. The officer gave me the basic information. Name, Marcus Webb. Age, 38. Time of death, approximately 11:30. Discovered by a neighbor, no suspicious circumstances. Medical examiner had already been notified. I was cleared to transport. I brought in the gurney and body bag. With help from one of the officers, we carefully transferred Marcus Webb into the bag. I sealed it, noted the time on my log, and secured him on the gurney. The officers signed my documentation. I wheeled him out to my van, loaded him properly, and secured everything. Before leaving, I took a photo of the building entrance with my phone. Company policy, visual confirmation of pickup location. I noted the time, 1:37, and drove to Gateway Memorial. The transport took 23 minutes. I unloaded at the funeral home, completed the transfer with the night director, and signed all the necessary paperwork. Standard procedure, no complications. I left Gateway at 2:15 and headed back to the depot. At 2:28, my phone rang. Dispatch. Omar, we have a pickup for you. Riverside Gardens Apartments, Unit 214. Overdose. Are you available? I felt my chest tighten. I told dispatch I'd just completed that pickup. Same address, same unit, same circumstances. The dispatcher was quiet for a moment. Let me check the system. I heard typing. Omar, I don't show any completed pickup at that location tonight. The call just came in 10 minutes ago. I told her I had documentation, photos, signatures. The body was already at Gateway Memorial. She asked me to hold while she verified. 5 minutes passed. She came back on the line. Omar, Gateway doesn't show any intake from you tonight, and the call is confirmed. Police are on scene at Riverside Gardens requesting transport for a Marcus Webb overdose, Unit 214. I pulled over, checked my phone. The photo I'd taken of the building entrance was still there, time-stamped at 1:37. I checked my paperwork folder. The completed transfer form was there, signed by the night director at Gateway Memorial. I called the funeral home directly. The night director answered. Gateway Memorial, this is Richards. I asked him about the Marcus Webb intake, about the body I'd delivered 30 minutes ago. Omar, you haven't been here tonight. We haven't had any intakes since 8. I told him to check his signature on my transfer form. He was quiet for a long moment. Omar, where are you right now? I told him. He said he'd call me back. I sat there on the shoulder, engine idling, trying to make sense of what was happening. My phone showed the photo. My paperwork showed the signature. My memory was clear. I'd completed that pickup and delivery. Dispatch called back. Omar, police are waiting for you at Riverside Gardens. They're requesting immediate response. I told her I'd already been there. She said they had no record of any previous transport. I asked her to check the call log. She did. According to the system, my only call of the night was this current one. The earlier call didn't exist. I drove back to Riverside Gardens. It took 18 minutes. When I arrived, 2 police officers were standing outside Unit 214, the same 2 officers from earlier. I recognized their faces, their badges, even the way one of them leaned against the doorframe. I approached them slowly, asked if they remembered me from earlier. They looked at each other, then back at me. Earlier? You just got here, one of them said. I told them I'd been there at 1:05, that we'd transferred the body together, that they'd signed my documentation. They shook their heads, said this was the first transport called for this unit. The officer checked his incident log. Deceased was discovered at midnight. We arrived at 12:20. You're the first transport to arrive. But I'd been here. I had the photo, the paperwork, the memory. I showed them the photo on my phone. They looked at it, then at each other. That's this building, but you must have taken it at some other time. I checked the metadata, 1:37 a.m., tonight, same night. I showed them. They couldn't explain it. They let me inside. The apartment looked identical to how I remembered it. Same layout, same furniture, and in the bedroom, lying on the floor next to the bed, was a body, in the same position, wearing the same clothes. Marcus Webb, age 38, overdose, the same body I'd already transported. I stood there staring at him, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. The officers were watching me with concern. One of them asked if I was okay. I told them yes. I brought in the gurney and body bag. We transferred Marcus Webb again, and I sealed the bag. They signed my documentation again. I wheeled him out to my van and loaded him. Before leaving, I took another photo of the building entrance. The timestamp read 3:18 a.m. I drove to Gateway Memorial. The same night director met me at the loading bay. He had no memory of the earlier delivery. We completed the intake together. He signed the paperwork. I stood there watching him, looking for any sign of recognition. Nothing. I asked him directly, "Have I delivered any other bodies tonight?" He checked his log. "This is your first." I went back to the van and opened my paperwork folder. The first set of transfer documents was gone. Just the current forms remained. I checked my phone. The photo from 1:37 was gone. Only the photo from 3:18 remained. I drove back to the depot in silence, filed my paperwork, clocked out, went home. The next morning, I checked the obituaries. Marcus Webb, age 38, died November 16th from accidental overdose, service pending. November 16th was the date on my paperwork, the date I'd completed the transport twice. But when I checked my calendar, my phone, my watch, they all showed November 17th. I'd lost a day somewhere, or lived the same day twice. I still don't know which. I still work transports. But when dispatch sends me to Riverside Gardens now, I check my phone first, check my paperwork, check the date, because I'm afraid I'll get there and find Marcus Webb on that bedroom floor again, waiting for his third pickup. I thought I understood solitude until I reviewed my dash cam and saw who'd been sitting beside me. My name is Nina Castellano, and I've been a body transport driver for Mountain View Memorial Services in Denver, Colorado for the past 8 years. Company policy requires dash cams in all vehicles, front-facing and interior-facing. They record continuously during every shift, documenting road conditions, driver behavior, and vehicle interior. It's for insurance purposes. Liability protection, evidence in case of accidents or disputes. Every 30 days, we're required to review our footage and sign off that everything appears normal. I'd reviewed hundreds of hours of footage without incident until I watched the recording from a Thursday night in October and saw something sitting in my passenger seat for 11 minutes. The call had come through at 11:45. Male patient, 71 years old, natural causes. Home death in a rural area west of Denver. Family was present. Everything was arranged. I'd be transporting him to Mountain View Memorial, about 90 minutes southeast. Standard overnight run through mountain roads. I arrived at the house at 12:30, a small ranch home at the end of a gravel driveway. The family met me at the door. Wife, 2 adult children, a grandchild. They were composed but tired. The deceased was in the master bedroom. They'd already prepared him, dressed him in a suit he'd wanted. We transferred him carefully into the body bag. The wife touched his hand one last time before I sealed it. The transport was quiet. I took Highway 70 east through the mountains. Light traffic, clear weather. I kept my speed steady and careful on the winding roads. I remember that drive clearly. I remember being alone in the cabin, just me and the sound of the engine and my own breathing. I remember the darkness outside the windows. The occasional passing truck, the steady rhythm of white lines on the road. I completed the delivery at Mountain View at 2:18. Signed the transfer papers, drove back to the depot, clocked out, went home. A routine night, nothing unusual, nothing memorable. 3 weeks later, I sat down to review my dashcam footage. Company policy. Every driver reviews their previous month's recordings and signs a verification form. I'd done this dozens of times. It was tedious but necessary. I usually played the footage at double speed, watching for anything that stood out. I loaded the files from that October night. The timestamp showed 11:45 p.m. The footage began as I drove toward the pickup location. I watched myself navigate the mountain roads, watched the house appear in my headlights, watched myself go inside and return with the gurney. I fast-forwarded through the loading process. Then came the drive back to Mountain View. I slowed the playback to normal speed, watching the road ahead through the front-facing camera. Everything looked routine. Then I switched to the interior camera, feed. That's when I saw it. At timestamp 12:53 a.m., a figure appeared in the passenger seat. I stopped the video, rewound it, played it again. At 12:52, The passenger seat was empty. At 12:53, someone was sitting there, not gradually appearing, not fading in, just suddenly present, as if they'd been there all along. The figure was wearing art clothing. I couldn't make out facial features. The interior camera's resolution wasn't high enough, and the cabin lighting was dim. But I could see the silhouette clearly. Someone sitting upright, hands in their lap, head turned slightly toward the windshield, watching the road. I felt my skin go cold. I remembered that drive. I remembered being alone. I would have noticed someone in my passenger seat, would have felt their presence, would have seen them in my peripheral vision, but the camera showed them there, clear and undeniable. I continued playing the footage. The figure remained in the passenger seat for 11 minutes, from 12:53 until 1:04. During that time, it didn't move, didn't shift position, didn't turn its head, just sat there, still and silent, as I drove through the darkness. At 1:04, it was gone. The passenger seat was empty again. Same sudden disappearance. One frame it was there, next frame gone. I checked the front-facing camera for that same time period. The road ahead, my driving was steady. No swerving, no sudden movements, nothing to indicate I'd noticed anything unusual. I drove exactly the way I always drove. Calm, focused, professional. I checked the cargo area camera. The body bag was secure throughout the entire journey. No movement, no anomalies. But someone had been in my passenger seat for 11 minutes, and I had no memory of it. I called my supervisor the next morning, told him I needed to discuss my dashcam footage. He told me to bring it in. I arrived at the depot at 10 and showed him the recording. We watched it together in his office. When the figure appeared at 12:53, he leaned closer to the monitor. "What the hell is that?" I told him I didn't know, that I had no memory of anyone being in my van. He rewound it, played it again, enhanced the image as much as the software allowed. The figure was there, undeniable, but the resolution wasn't clear enough to see details. "Could someone have gotten into your van without you noticing?" he asked. I told him no, the van was locked when I was inside the house. I would have heard the door open, would have felt the movement. He checked my GPS data for that night. It showed continuous movement from the pickup location to Mountain View. No stops, no deviations. I'd driven straight through. "Nina, I don't know what to tell you. The footage shows something, but..." He trailed off, staring at the screen. I asked if I needed to file an incident report. He thought about it for a long moment. "Let me review the footage more carefully, check with tech, support about possible glitches. For now, keep this between us." I never heard back from him about it. When I asked 2 weeks later, he said tech support couldn't explain the anomaly. Possible camera malfunction, lens flare, shadow from passing lights. He didn't sound convinced. I still work transports. I still drive those mountain roads at night. But I check my passenger seat obsessively now. Every few minutes, I glance over to confirm it's empty, and I avoid looking at my dashcam footage unless absolutely required, because last month I reviewed another night's recording. Different route, different transport, different date. And at timestamp 1:37 a.m., the figure appeared again in my passenger seat. This time it stayed for 19 minutes, and this time I watched it turn its head, slowly, deliberately, and look directly at the interior camera, at me, watching weeks later from the safety of my home. I deleted that footage, filed a report saying the camera malfunctioned, got the equipment replaced, but I know it wasn't the camera because 3 nights ago I was driving back from a transport, alone, the cabin dark, the road empty ahead, and in my peripheral vision I saw something shift, someone sitting in the passenger seat, just for a moment, just long enough for me to turn my head, and when I looked, the seat was empty, but it had been warm. I was trained to bus when something feels wrong with the van, but I wasn't prepared for the moment I understood why. My name is Andre Washington, and I've been a body transport driver for Riverbend Memorial Services in Charleston, South Carolina for the past 14 years. Experience teaches you things about vehicles, how they handle under different loads, how weight distribution affects steering and braking, how a van pulls slightly to one side when cargo shifts or isn't properly secured. You develop an instinct for these mechanical realities. You feel them through the steering wheel, through the subtle resistance of the vehicle responding to physics. But physics doesn't account for what happened on a February night when my van pulled left for 2 straight hours, carrying a woman who'd been paralyzed on her right side her entire life. The call came through at 10:30. Female patient, 82 years old, natural causes. She'd passed peacefully at Palmetto Regional Medical Center. I'd be transporting her to Riverbend Memorial, about 2 hours north. Standard overnight run. Highway 17 the whole way. I'd driven it hundreds of times. I arrived at the hospital at 11. The night staff helped me with the transfer. The deceased was a small woman, perhaps 90 pounds. Thin frame, delicate features. The nurse who helped me load her mentioned she'd been a piano teacher for 40 years, beloved in her community, a gentle life, a peaceful death. We secured her in the body bag and transferred her to the gurney. I locked everything into place in my van, did my safety check, and noted the time. 11:23. I started the engine and headed north on Highway 17. Within 5 minutes, I felt it. The van was pulling to the left. Not dramatically, just a subtle, constant resistance, like the alignment was off or the tire pressure was low on the left side. I compensated instinctively, keeping slight pressure to the right on the steering wheel to maintain a straight line. At mile marker 42, I pulled into a rest area to check. I walked around the van, inspecting the tires, all properly inflated, no visible damage. I opened the rear doors and checked the gurney, centered perfectly, straps secure, weight evenly distributed. Everything looked correct. I got back in and continued driving. The pull to the left resumed it immediately. Same subtle resistance, same need to compensate. I told myself it was minor, nothing dangerous, just a slight misalignment I'd have checked when I returned to the depot, but the pull was consistent, unvarying, for miles and miles, that same leftward drift. My right arm began to ache from the constant pressure I was maintaining on the wheel. At mile marker 70, I pulled over again. This time, I didn't just check the obvious things. I inspected the suspension, checked the cargo area more thoroughly, even rechecked the gurney straps, thinking maybe the body had shifted somehow despite the locks. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly where it should be. I called the depot's after hours line. The mechanic on call answered. Yeah, Andre? I described the issue. He asked the standard questions. Tire pressure? Good. Visual damage? None. Cargo secured? Yes. He suggested it might be road crown, the slight angle built into highways for drainage, but I'd driven this route countless times. I knew what road crown felt like. This was different. Just drive careful, bring it in tomorrow, and we'll put it on the lift. I continued north. The pull persisted, mile after mile. My arm ached, my shoulder tightened. I found myself constantly adjusting, constantly compensating. The van wanted to go left, needed to go left. It took active effort to keep it straight. At mile marker 98, something changed. The pull intensified, not dramatically, just enough to notice, just enough to require more pressure on the wheel. I slowed down, thinking maybe speed was a factor. 60 miles per hour, 55, 50. The pull remained constant, proportional to my speed, but always there. I looked in the rearview mirror. The body bag was still secure, still centered, but I had an irrational thought. What if the weight had shifted inside the bag? What if the body itself had moved somehow, rolling to one side? I knew that was impossible. Bodies don't move on their own. Rigor mortis sets in. Gravity works predictably. But the thought persisted. I pulled into a gas station at mile marker 106. This time, I opened the body bag. Just the top section, around the head and shoulders. I needed to see, needed to verify that nothing had shifted, that the body was positioned the way we'd placed it. She looked peaceful, unchanged, her head centered, her shoulders level. Nothing had moved. I re-zipped the bag carefully and stood there in the cold parking lot, trying to understand what was happening. An older man was pumping gas at the next pump. He glanced over at my van, saw the company logo, and nodded respectfully. People always do. They recognize the work we do, the service we provide. I got back in and drove the final 26 miles to Riverbend. The pull never stopped. My arm was shaking by the time I arrived at 1:48 in the morning. The funeral director, a woman named Patterson I'd worked with for years, came out to help me unload. Long drive? She asked, noticing my exhaustion. I told her about the pull, about checking everything repeatedly, about how the van had fought me for 2 straight hours. She helped me wheel the gurney inside. We began the intake process. She checked the body bag tag, verified the paperwork, and started making notes. Did the family mention anything unusual about the deceased? She asked. I told her no, just that she'd been a piano teacher, a peaceful death. Patterson nodded and continued reading the medical chart that had been transferred with the body. She paused. Interesting. Says here she had right side paralysis, complete, since birth, some kind of cerebral condition. She looked up. Her entire right side was paralyzed her whole life. I felt the cold settle into my bones. She continued reading. Atrophied muscles on the right. Significant weight differential between left and right sides of the body. The chart notes it was pronounced enough to affect her gait when she was younger. I stared at the gurney, at the body bag, at the woman I'd transported for 2 hours while the van pulled left, pulled toward the side that carried more weight, pulled in the direction physics demanded. Patterson signed the intake form. Everything look okay to you? I told her yes, signed the transfer papers, walked back to my van. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. When I pulled out of the parking lot, the van drove straight. Perfect alignment, no pull to either side. I still work transports. I still drive Highway 17. But when I feel a van pulling to one side now, I don't just check the tires and suspension. I check the intake paperwork. I look for details about the deceased, their physical condition, their history. Because last week I transported another body. Different patient, different circumstances. And the van pulled to the right for 90 minutes. When I delivered her, the funeral director mentioned the deceased had been a softball player, right-handed her whole life. Overdeveloped muscles on her right arm and shoulder from decades of pitching. The van pulled toward the weight, just like physics demands, just like it always has.